there's a lot of other issues in this book that I at least want to touch on, and one of them is labor. And we can talk a little bit more here. Waffle House makes a reappearance in a less attractive light when you start talking about labor. And I'm just curious: are the labor issues in the food business just the prime example of the way the rich are getting richer? And you already talked about farmers not being the poor folk in this business, but servers certainly are, and people in food access perhaps are. And so is this just, classic American capitalism? The rich get richer and the working poor get the shaft in general, or is there something particular about the food issue that really is leading to an underclass?
I mean, in short, I would just say that yes, you are correct.
Well, I need
And it
more
has
than that, Jan.
and it has to do no, but it has to do broadly with two things, right? Number one is quite simply the nature of agricultural work, which is that it is often is I hesitate because it is not low skilled. It's extremely high skilled. Making a good waffle at Waffle House, cutting berries or grapes off a vine is high skilled and tiring work. But in terms of educational or other prerequisites, there are just a lot of people who can do the work. So the basic forces of supply and demand make it a buyer's market, which depresses wages, right? So if you're going to be a server, if you're going to work on a farm, there are a lot of people who can work those jobs and who might want to work those jobs, which means that employers can just pay less. But the second part of this is that employers can pay less because historically in the United States, there have been very organized business interests, more powerful and more organized than labor interests, who have actively sought to depress wages. And we see this in terms of everything from the federal minimum wage in general to things specific to the food system, like the extremely low, just over $2 to this day, minimum wage for tipped workers.
Unbelievable.
And that's the result of, as we write in the book, very active lobbying by the food industry, the National Restaurant Association, and so on and so forth. But this is not a sort of immutable of labor economics. So you go to places, so for instance, the Fight for 15 increased minimum wages for fast food workers. You look at other countries like Europe, where minimum wages are much higher and there are more labor protections. So you can have more dignified, safer, better paid food labor. But in order to do that, you need the political will and you need the organizing. And historically in the United States, to put it most simply, the bosses have been better organized
Yeah.
than the workers.
To answer your question, or just to add a little bit of context here, like workers specifically in restaurants and groceries as a percentage of the overall workforce, I believe has grown pretty substantially over the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st century, right? So we've had a migration of the workforce from other sectors increasingly into service. Mid-century America is the peak of unionization, and people often think about unions through the prototype of the industrial factory setting. And there's a deeper history about the ways in which unions have attempted to sort of shift their organizing strategies in light of the shift in sort of like the labor market. And some of those shifts have been successful and others have not. But the thing that's really exciting to us, and was really exciting to us when we were writing this, is that when we look at employment in the United States and we look at where the real front lines for workers taking control of their workplaces and demanding dignified work and good wages, we find that like food service locations are at the front lines over and over again. Mm. And when we listen to people kind of like talking about the evils of a place like Waffle House, and we are upfront about those evils in the book, right? We are upfront about a lot of the things that are wrong with how Waffle Houses are run. But it's really instructive to listen to the workers who are organizing in Waffle Houses and what they say about their work. What they say about their work is not that they want Waffle Houses to go away and to be replaced by boutique farm to fork whatever. They want their Waffle Houses to be dignified places to work where they are paid decently and where they are treated like with the respect that they ought be due. In other words, they're not out there asking to get rid of the industrial food system. They're trying to make the industrial food system a place where dignified work can be had and where people can support themselves. And our stance is quite simple. We should be supporting them in that effort. Not by arguing that we got to shut down the industrial food system, but that like improving the lot of workers within the industrial food system really ought to be a major progressive objective for people who care about food.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a compelling argument. I do want to, we're gonna run out of time, and there's so much to ask you. But I do want to move on a little bit to the labor issue because this is currently my obsession: labor issues on the farm, quote unquote farm, than in food service, and obviously the immigration question, which you could say is kind of at the forefront of everybody's minds these days, and the absolute hostility of the administration to immigrants is affecting or has the potential to affect the food system because, in fact, factory farms and in slaughterhouses, there is enormous number of immigrant workers, and I am really concerned with what they're planning on doing with H-2A visas. I know the meat and dairy industries really want them on their factory farms, even though the whole idea of H-2A visas was, well, sort of the idea was for work that is not full year round, that it's seasonal, and so that's why they allowed these crazy visas, which are basically, well, not slavery, but indentured servitude. And the other day, I heard Stephen Miller tweeted, "The West is the first and only civilization to import a foreign labor class that is granted full political rights, including welfare and the right to vote. And that sure ain't true of people who have H-2A visas because they are just brought in here to work and then sent home." All right. I know I'm ranting now, but can you explain a little bit of how these visas work in agriculture, the need for immigrants, and how you think the industry is moving? Because I think this idea that I saw that the Democrat running for Congress around here is supporting because we live in a place where there's a lot of dairy farms. It's totally in support of using H-2A visas for dairy farms, which is, I think, is insane. All right, that was my rant. Who wants to comment on it? That wasn't exactly a question.
I love your
It's
rant.
kind of been on my mind.
I mean, look, the long and short of it is that American agriculture relies on migrant labor. There simply are not enough Americans willing or able to do the.
Can I just insert
Yes.
there, at the amount they pay? If people will do anything if you pay them enough money. They're really bad jobs and they pay shit.
Well,
Sorry.
yeah, but even well, that's the thing. I mean, this is one of those labor economics questions that's it's hard to run the counterfactual because if you paid extremely well to do some of these jobs, and we see this sometimes with rate when wages go up in farmed work, but the proportion of American to migrant labor does not change because of the difficult nature of the work. And this is the
If you
case.
raised it even higher,
I mean, as I said, it's a
I mean,
it's
I
a
guess
labor.
the point I'm making is that it's not a viable business because you can't pay people enough to do it unless they're desperate. I'm sorry. This is this is a thing for me at the moment. All right, I'm gonna shut up now.
Well, I mean, I think it's a valid question to ask. It's an important question to ask. As I said, we can't run the counterfactual because we can't run a counterfactual where there are very good wages and less or no migrants to know if those jobs would be filled
Right, right.
or not, right? But I think what we can say is that quite simply the nature of agricultural work, some of which remains very seasonal. If we're talking about the harvest in California and all up the West Coast, and those jobs do rely on migrant labor. In fact, historically, there were, if you look at something like the Bracero system, there was a specific system to facilitate seasonal labor coming in from Mexico to the United States, again, to address labor shortages. And so I think this is one of those places where political rhetoric just doesn't jive with the realities of agriculture. You can't have American agriculture of any kind. Never mind dairy farms and slaughterhouses. You can't have berry harvests or grape harvests without migrant labor, and that's just a hard reality of the way our food system
Yeah, and to be
works.
clear, I'm not. I mean, I don't think there's a problem with having migrant labor. I'm all for immigrants. It's just that I think they're immigrants like any other immigrants, and they shouldn't have this special situation. And there's no reason to do it just because the work is seasonal, because almost all of the work is now done through contractors, not individual farms. So basically, they're working year round. I mean, they're just on different farms, but they can't leave the farms because they're enslaved. Well, I shouldn't use that term, but they're they're they don't have options like any other immigrant in any other business. They are just brought in here to do the work, treated very poorly, and under this administration, of course, even more poorly, and sent home. And I think this is Stephen Miller's plan for a lot more than agriculture.